situation for them. Beyond that, though, it's just a regular player set. And then, of course, the big question is, can they get through all the other ones and then set up their chance to get into the Final Four tournament by getting by Michigan?
Guys, I think we're getting some feedback there, so if somebody has their radio up or whatever, just kind of turn down a little bit. Rick, number 4 in the coaches poll, Georgia, 13-2. I still think that the sting of losing to Alabama in overtime in the championship game will provide a lot of motivation for Jack Fromm, who looks to avoid a sophomore slump. Thoughts?
Thoughts are his name is Jake Fromm, and then not Jack Fromm, and then also replacing guys like Nick Chubb and and Sony Michel, and then Roquan Smith on that defense. They had some big shoes to fill. So we've seen that Kirby Smart is running that program just basically how the disciplined Nick Saban has Alabama. I think Georgia and Alabama are going to butt heads again. I think it's going to be them two for the SEC title this year. I know Georgia played against Auburn last year, and that's the thing with Alabama not making their championship game, because a couple of years ago Nick Saban himself said that you have to win your conference championship to even make the playoff, and then Alabama didn't even make their championship game last year. But I think it's going to be Georgia and Alabama in the SEC championship this year.
Matt, going over to the Big 12, if you will. Obviously, that was Baker Mayfield country with Oklahoma. Oklahoma in the number 5 in the coaches poll. They were 12-2. So I'm not sure. I think it's Rodney Anderson who's going to be replacing Baker Mayfield. Big shoes to fill out
Kyler
there.
Murray.
Thoughts on Oklahoma? Oh, okay. Thanks.
Honestly, I don't think it's going to matter who the quarterback
no,
is.
Rodney
This
Anderson's
is my
the running
upset
back,
special for September 1st.
Go ahead.
I have Florida Atlantic beating Oklahoma. Florida Atlantic is a very dangerous team that Phil Steele is going gaga about right now, and there's good reason. There's a lot of potential with that team. Oklahoma better not enter that game with their pants down. They could get stunned and humiliated by Florida Atlantic in Norman if they're not careful on September 1st.
Go ahead, Rick. I know you were saying something. Go ahead.
No, I like that. Tom, that is a hot.
You cut off on me, right?
Matt,
go ahead.
Yeah, it was great. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Go ahead. What'd you say?
All right. I was like, Tom, now that is what we call a hot take. That is great. Matt, that is awesome. I love that. I'm going to agree with you. I think the Lane train comes in and they get the win at Oklahoma. I'm going to go with Matt, and that mini breaking break segment, that might be the first breaking break hot take, man. So thanks for that, Matt. I agree with that. That's awesome.
Well, thank Phil Steele. Phil Steele has them in his top 30. And Phil Steele has that big book, so I'd say I don't think he's blowing smoke. I really don't.
No, I don't think so either. I mean, I love Phil Steele. So.
Well, guys, the next one team in the coaches poll, rated number 6, is Washington. Washington, always the redheaded stepchild, if you will, in the NCAA. Nobody likes Washington. Nobody wants Washington to get in the playoffs. Oh, poor Huskies, poor puppies out there. But they do have Jake Browning and Miles Gaskin returning. Is this going to be another year, guys, that Washington gets snubbed by the NCAA? Rick?
Can they get past Stanford for a change? They play against these teams that slow them down, and then all of a sudden they can't put up any points whatsoever. So they go against Stanford and play against that pro-style offense, and Stanford slows them down and beats them up in the middle with the running game. That never sits well with Washington. And we're going to find out what type of team they are in week 1 when they play against Auburn, because Auburn's going to beat them up. I mean, that's a big SEC team going up there to play against Washington in week 1. So we're going to find out week 1 what type of team Washington is.
Well, everybody's got a plan till they get smacked.
Stop being their own worst enemy at this point, because they had problems beating of old Washington State in the Apple Cup last year. So that's the big question in my mind is, I mean, if they play to the potential, they are one of the top teams in the country. But that's the question mark. Can they play to the potential every week? Because you have to do that in college football, because once you lose one game, you are in deep trouble, and then once you lose 2, you're out.
Guys, let's talk a little bit about Wisconsin, number 7 in the coaches poll. I tell you what, to me they should be ranked a little bit higher than number 7. They came in at 13-1 last year. Let's not forget how good they may have a bit of a vanilla offense, but their defense is incredible. And certainly they have one of the top offensive linemen in running back Jonathan Taylor. Should be explosive again. Why they're rated number 7 is just simply probably because they're in the Big Ten and they're not Ohio State. Rick?
I think that division of the Big Ten is probably the best division in college football because you got Wisconsin, Ohio State, Michigan, and Matt, you may have to correct me. I believe Penn State is in that division and maybe even Nebraska, but I'm not sure. Nebraska might be on the other side. But the Big Ten is growing. The Big Ten is getting tougher, and that division is leading the way. I think that division is the toughest division in college football.
Matt, go ahead.
No Ohio State on the schedule, but also the thing I think it could hurt them if they are on like 11-1. Look at the non-conference schedule they're playing: Western Kentucky, New Mexico, BYU. There is not a Gaga team in that list of teams that I see right there. That if it is close between them and another school for one of those last spots to get into the Final Four, I think that could be a very tough sell for the committee to put them in over someone else that may have a tougher non-conference opponent on their list.
So let's look a little bit at the number 8 team, Miami Hurricanes, down in southern Florida. Obviously a great place to play if you like good weather. They had an awesome start to their season last year, Rick, and then they just fell flat on their face. That offense has to do better. Can they do better? And they need to see a better job from their quarterback, Malik Roser. That's pivotal for the success of the Hurricanes. Rick?
Right. Malik's going to have more consistent quarterback play, and that defense is going to play as good as they did last year. Then to have a chance to compete with the Clemson in that conference. And I don't know what happened to them after the Irish game. They destroyed the Irish, unfortunately. But after that, they lose something like 3 or 4 straight? I'm not sure exactly what happened to Miami last year. But they're going to have to play better, more consistent quarterback play, and step up. And might have to see more appearances by that turnover chain this year if they want to have a chance to compete with Clemson. I think the AP might just be in love with Miami. Mark Rick is a great coach. He's back at his alma mater, and that stadium, the Hard Rock Stadium or whatever that they call that down there now, is we saw on national TV against the Irish. That is a tough place to play. I think they might just be ranking them a little too high for me. I'm not sure if they're a top 10 team just based off the end of the season last year, but they're going to be tough, and they're going to be Clemson's only competition in that conference this year.
Call me weird.
Go ahead, Matt.
I think that 41-8 win over Notre Dame gave them a false sense of security, which is not a good thing. It might sound funny, but I think once they did that, they let their guard down. They thought it was going to come easy to them, and they paid the price for that, and they kind of let their guard down. I think right now they need to stay even-keeled. That's been the thing I think that's hurt Miami over the last few years since their heyday with Dennis Erickson, Larry Coker was the coaches. That even-keelness that they had has disappeared again. And until they get it back, I think they're going to have a hard time making a strong case of being a team that could possibly challenge for national championships like they consistently did in the 80s and 90s.
Guys, let's look at Penn State. Again, another strong Big Ten team, but, gone are Shaquan Barkley and 3 of the top 4 receivers. They certainly have their quarterback still, Tracy McSorley, and a veteran offensive line. I think that gives you some optimism for Penn State. But, Rick, can Penn State make it to a playoff berth without Shaquan Barkley and others?
I think they can because I think McSorley is good enough as a quarterback to do it, and I think James Franklin is a hell of a coach and a tenacious recruiter, and he's going to have his teams ready to go in every game. And I think Penn State, my opinion anyway, Penn State will be the Big Ten representative this year for the top 4. I've got Penn State in my top 4.
There will be a lot more battle tests in Wisconsin. I think they got a lot tougher Big Ten slate. Ohio State's on the schedule, a trip to Michigan. And I think right now you look at that. The thing, though, that's a little bit scary out there, they got a couple, gimmies against App State and Kent State, but that game at Heinz Field at Pitt could be a scary one if they get up to a slow start.
Guys, number 10 in the coaches poll. This is the balance, but we're doing kind of a special preview of Breaking Rank. Remember, August 22nd, starting at 8 o'clock. Rick-Riggin's going to be your host. I'm going to be your co-host. Matt's going to join us when he can. Mel's going to be a sports show. Is going to be a regular staple. We're going to have a lot of fun with it, and we're going to be talking college football, giving you the weekly dose of all the breaking news that's going on in college football, and especially as we get closer and closer to playoff berths. The number 10, Auburn, certainly they're the only team to beat Alabama last year, and the Tigers start this season focused on repeating an SEC West champs. Rick?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen this year because I think that's going to be Georgia's going to take over that. But I do think that they're going to be battle-tested as well, as Matt just put it. For Penn State, I mean, they start with Washington and with Alabama and then play all the SEC teams in between. I think it's going to be a 2 or 3 loss season for Auburn, which is great considering what their schedule is, but they beat themselves up. They are not afraid to play an opponent like Washington, unlike, their rival there in Alabama who refuses to play against teams like that, especially on the road. But you will never see Bama while Nick Saban is there play a team like that on the road. It's always been a neutral site game or what have you. But I think Auburn re-signing Gus Malzahn was the best thing they could have done, and I don't think it's going to be the year for them. They're definitely one of the elite teams in the country, but I'm thinking 2 losses.
Go ahead.
You look at those last
thoughts,
2 games in the last 3 weeks there, even though, they got the game between them as far as Liberty, but at Georgia, at Alabama, smart money says they're going to have to win both of those games, and they're probably going to have to play Alabama or Georgia again in the SEC championship game. I just don't see a scenario where they can win all 3 of those games to get into the playoff.
All right, guys, we've talked about this team a couple times today. I know you're up there in Notre Dame country, Matt, and Rick, you're a big Notre guy yourself. Obviously, they open up the season September 1st against Michigan. It's certainly going to be a big game there. Brandon Wimbush is the quarterback there, but has to be more consistent in throwing. Rick, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, what are your thoughts? Number 11 in the poll, by the way.
Yeah, and I'm with Matt 100% on this one. It's going to be Notre Dame's retooled offense that we don't really know much about just yet against that great defense that Michigan's going to bring into South Bend. One of those under the lights primetime games, I know they're going to have a green out or trying for a green out. Stuff like that, I don't know, Matt, you're up there. Seems to not really work out when these big games like this happen. As last year we saw against Georgia, it was more of a red out, which is really disheartening. But they're going to do the green out for Notre Dame Stadium this year during this game, and it's going to be that offense, Notre Dame's offense versus that great defense against Michigan. And that's going to be the big question mark is Brandon Wimbush, what type of improvements he's made during the offseason.
Let's face it, Rick. They have to win the Michigan game. I think they have any realistic chance to get to the playoffs because you look at the rest of the schedule, and there are some dangerous teams in there. Wake Forest is a much-improved team, and having to go to Winston-Salem's going to be tough. Stanford, you mentioned, is going to be tough. Va Tech on the road, that has the inklings of a potential blow-up like the Miami game was. Pittsburgh is a scary opponent, like I mentioned, with Penn State. Navy having to go to triple option is going to be tough. Northwestern's going to be a scary team. Florida State's going to be much improved, I think, from the start of the season to when they played on November 10th. And then, of course, you close on USC. So if they lose that Michigan game, I just don't see, Rick, and I'd love your comment on this, I just don't see a way where they can run the rest of the table and go 11-1 and have a chance to make the playoff.
Yeah, I agree with you. And one thing I would say, we talk about Brandon Wimbush and the improvements he's made. What are people saying about Shea Patterson? What can we expect out of Shea Patterson? Because I feel like he was kind of like an average quarterback in the SEC, and now he's coming into Michigan on a very limited time trying to pick up a new offense, learn the scheme, and build some type of relationship with receivers. So what can we expect out of Shea Patterson from Michigan?
Remember, Purdue did that when they had the Miami transfer, Marvin Marv, and they tried to bring him in right away, and it didn't work out. I think it's the perfect timing for Notre Dame to play Michigan on that statement. The thing is, though, can they find a way to break through on that defense? And they got to be able to get that